Heather. Hi, my name is Liz Powell. I am the founder and head of G2G Consulting and also co-founded the Shauna M Sorrells program with Isaiah Dadsey a few years ago now. Today, what we'd like to do is give you tips and insights on the Shauna M Sorrells program and other ways of accessing grants for nonprofits. We want this to be interactive, so please post your questions. We are recording it, so we will share that with anyone who RSVP'd for today. And we hope that it's really helpful information that you're gaining and that you can use in your efforts to raise money for your very good causes. So with that, I think we can go to the next slide. So here's an agenda of what we'll cover today. We'll give you some background on us, the program, Shauna, of course. And we want to recognize again the grant award winners. And then we want to hear from the winner, which actually that is a typo there. The winner this year was not Seeds of Literacy. Seeds of Literacy was the winner last year. But we will hear from Wendy Tarr from Arch momentarily. And she's going to share what she did in her application that we hope will be helpful for you when you apply next year. And then we'll close out with some tips for government funding generally and take your questions. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about us. We are a government affairs firm, 15 years now. We focus on accessing government funding for folks. So many are nonprofits. We also work with some startups and for-profits, but for nonprofits, there's phenomenal funding opportunities through the government. And it's not just through traditional grants, but through special funding allocations that Congress can make. And my colleague Becky is going to talk about that in more detail, but we want to make sure you know that we do have some expertise there, and we'd love to be helpful to any of the Shauna M Sorrells grants recipients, grant applicants, this whole community of nonprofits doing great things to make a difference in the world. You can see making a difference is very important to us. We have a definite bent in Ohio, but we are nationally, we are based in Washington, D.C., and we work with a lot of national organizations. Advocacy is our passion, as well as making a difference. We organize meetings, get funding, do all kinds of things. So if that's helpful to you, please reach out to us offline, and we're happy to answer any questions. Next slide, please. So Shauna M. Sorrells is an amazing person. She is the mother of my eldest son. She was like a sister to me, and just an amazing person and an amazing leader in the nonprofit world. She actually rose up to become the National Director of Housing for U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department in Washington, D.C. She went on to lead the Housing Opportunities Commission in Montgomery County. She's just very passionate about access to healthy, quality housing, affordable housing for people, and then all the related things that tie into that. She was passionate about health, education, addressing disparities, whether it's in education, health, workforce, a lot of different issues. And she just was a really an amazing role model. So we created this program to really honor her legacy and the work that she has done over the years on a personal level and a professional level. So we launched this program just after she passed away. She passed away at the end of 2019. So we launched it in 2020. And this just sums up what we've done thus far over the past few years since starting the program. Making a difference in accessing funding. Again, our priorities align with this program. And we have awarded $10,000 to 3 grand prize winners from the beginning. It started out with the focus. The first winner was focused on breast cancer. The second winner focused on education. And the third winner focused on reentry into for folks, especially women. So really different and important causes, all addressed and funded through the program. We also would give awards to, or have given awards to, the finalists who just missed making that grand prize award. And so we've had 6 of those. And then we've had 14 semi-finalists. So they were, we thought really important, should get a small award. So we did smaller awards for those folks. And then also the slide just points out the schedule. So every January, we like to do a webinar to give these tips. Every September, we put out the application timeline. In October, we start accepting applications, and then we narrow it down. This committee narrows it down to 3 finalists, and then we put it online for online voting. And so it's really important to rally your supporters to vote online. I think one of the folks in this most recent one didn't realize that, but that's a huge part of this. We want that grassroots support, and it's a great way to help raise your profile as a small nonprofit. So that's why we really like that online voting. And then in November, we announced the grand prize winner in our little online event we call Opening Doors to Giving, because we want people to be encouraged to give to numerous nonprofits through this program, because we know that all of you are very deserving. So next slide, please. So just a little bit about Shauna. These, I think, are some great quotes. Make a difference in your community. It's very important to her. And this life is all there is. Make the most of it. Give, get, be. Give more than you get what you need, and be happy. So I think really helpful quotes from Shauna. Next slide, please. And then the goals of the Shauna M. Sorrells program. We want to provide grants to nonprofits that dedicate meaningful services and programs to women and children, especially women of color. We think that's an important priority. We want to aim to honor her legacy and continue her work in making a difference, especially for those most in need. Third, by organizing this annual Opening Doors to Giving event, we're trying to facilitate helping many nonprofits, not just the one grand prize winner. So that's why we have the other nonprofits that are finalists speak. That's why we recognize them. We try to post their websites for making donations. I think that's really important. And then bringing together smaller nonprofits to hopefully, you can help each other and share insights together and hopefully grow together. So that's sort of the goals of the program. And next slide. These are the folks that got special recognition. We have not been giving funds to this group, but we do want to highlight them because they need a little shout out. And in case you wanted to make a donation, all really good causes. So you can see all the websites. The next slide, I think, shows the semi-finalists. Also some great groups. So all these semi-finalists did get $500. They got a small donation. And then the next slide. These are the finalists, CASA and ICE Mentors Program. These are great organizations. They got to speak during the Opening Doors to Giving event, and they each received $1,000. And then the actual award winner, Wendy Tarr from Arch, Accompanying Returning Citizens with Hope. So we have Wendy here today to share her expertise on how she made her application, because I think that it's really important to hear from the past winner to hopefully help you in your applications. So with that, would love to turn it over to Wendy.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you everybody who helped to participate in giving our organization and all the other applicants the opportunity to be considered for this award. I feel very grateful for the funding that has been able to be provided, and it's going to be so useful for us advancing some of the important work that we're doing to help women in the community. We're based in Columbus, who are returning home from the justice system, or have been justice involved in are in need of stable transitional housing. So I was asked to share a little bit of my thoughts on how I approached this application for those of you who may be applying. And so, I think the things I wanted to say, is of course, when you're applying for any kind of grant, this is about the legacy of Shauna. So the things that she's passionate about and the areas of focus that matter most to her, I think is really important. Your organization may have multiple things that they do, but, focusing in on a project or something that can can most align with her passion. I think is really important for us. You know, we do a number of things, but this house that we were about to start, it kind of was the perfect timing, honestly, because we were right in the midst of standing something up that was new. So that's another thing. You know, maybe you have a new initiative or something that that could utilize, especially dollars that are you know, gifted in this nature. So, I mean, I think that being able to explain how the funds will, you know, support a unique project or something that is a vital need in the community where there's gaps is something that that you should think about and how that may relate to your work. I tried to include data. You know, part of the application is asking about how does this, what are the needs and how does your program meet those needs? So, you know, being able to explain, you know, and tell the story to, you know, whoever's reading these applications about the impact and the scope of your work is always very important, of course. And then, and, you know, I think also, especially for us with the justice system, you know, being able to highlight those disparities. A lot of nonprofits, smaller nonprofits, may focus on target populations, right? Specific parts of our community. And so, you know, if there is women that you're serving or women and children that you're serving that are facing, you know, additional hurdles or barriers, or you know how this impacts women of color, you know, I think as Liz was saying, that's really important. And so to be able to highlight that and to make sure that you mention those things in your application would also be, you know, I think an important recommendation. And then finally, you know, the voting part. So when we made it to the finalist part, I was excited. Then I'm like, oh no, I mean, we got to get people to vote for us. But honestly, it was really is kind of awesome because it allowed us to really, you know, put ourselves out there further to our network about what we're doing and generate some momentum. And so I think what's really cool, and I really appreciate at the end of the day, it's stressful, but at the end of the day, I appreciate that that was part of the process because at least for us, you know, our house, we have a big house that we were, you know, about to open, and we needed furniture and we needed things. And I think through the publicity of what we were able to do, you know, with promoting this potential award, it allowed us to also obtain some donors and other interest in what we're doing. And so our whole house is furnished and all has been donated. And so actually our first girl moves into the house today. Like, it's kind of funny that this is happening today. So, you know, we're just very, very grateful. And the funds have been used to purchase lots of things that we needed to get this house started up. And truthfully, it's taken like all the stress off of my shoulders for us to be able to achieve this goal that we've had for a few years. So I'm really grateful for that. And then just on the voting, I will say this, I got a little like, you know, I don't know if, you know, you can post things on social media or whatever, but if you're like me, you have a lot of contacts in your phone that maybe you've just known for years. So I just took like a little text message, and I just sat there all day when I was in a conference for 2 days, and I just sat there and copied and pasted and copied and pasted, and I texted people and asked them, you know, send them the link and ask them to vote. And you know, that makes it really simple when your phone is right into your hand, that people may be more likely to do that. I'm not sure if that's what helped us get numbers, but I would think it probably was part of it. So, you know, reaching out to your friends and family, and you know, being forward about asking for those votes instead of just like throwing them out in a general email or a general Facebook, you know, post or whatever, I think is just another strategy that you may want to employ if you make it to the final round. So thank you again. We're just very, very grateful and appreciate everything that y'all are doing and this opportunity. It's not, you know, it's hard for small nonprofits sometimes to get money, especially like little pots of money like this, that we can kind of spend to really meet the needs that we have, that sometimes you're kind of hamstrung. And so it's a huge blessing, and we're super grateful, and we're going to have everybody over to come see this property soon. And so thank you again for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Wendy. That was really awesome to hear your insights, your experience with the process and applying for our grant, and wonderful for us to hear that it, you know, as you shared, the voting helped leverage some additional donations and get the word out about your needs. Like that encapsulates, I think, part of our goal in having the voting and having this be interactive with the community. So really, really happy to hear that, and appreciate you taking the time to share your experience with our audience today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
So I'm Becky Watts. I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the tips for pursuing the grant, the Shauna M. Sorrells grant, but also share a little bit about our expertise here at G2G Consulting, the company behind this, that in the world of government grants. So I'll start with the SMS grant. Wendy actually shared a lot of what I was going to say, so I will be brief here, but and it's great to hear that she agrees as a successful applicant. But certainly with any grant, as she mentioned, you want to study the purpose and the background of the grant, so that when you're applying, you can make sure your narrative sort of fits with that, what, you know, addresses that grant, that purpose and the background of the grant when you're putting together your narrative. We like the clear, succinct explanation of your organization and how it's a fit with our grant, because we're reviewing a lot of them. This is, the one, opportunity for us each year to go through this, and we want to make sure it's well written and it's succinct and kind of gets to the point of how it's a fit with the grant purpose. How you would use the funds is very important to us as well. So we want to make sure you include that as it relates to the purpose of the grant. Following the instructions, again, always, we work again in the government fields, and we are always hearing from government folks that, they have to throw out a lot of grants because the instructions were not followed. And the same thing happens here. Metrics, statistics, impact, very important. We appreciate understanding how you measure your impact in the community that you serve, and any statistics you can include to share that. And the expected impact of the funding as well, very important. Addressing how your organization and or this grant will address women, African Americans, Latina, underserved communities. Again, that's sort of part of the purpose of the grant. So including that there is helpful. And then we can tell, as I think probably many grantors can tell, when we're getting a tailored response versus boilerplate language that you just copy and paste into each grant you apply for. And so we appreciate when it's been clearly very tailored. Next slide. So again, I see we do have some questions. Okay, so yes, please, if you're, we are going to do a Q&A at the end, so please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A if you have any questions for Wendy or any of us on the panel. So we do a lot of work with nonprofits throughout Ohio, throughout the country, and we know that people are always interested in government grants of varying sizes and purposes. There are different ways to go about this. One is certainly through grants.gov, which is the federal government's method for posting their grants that are released every day through the federal government, through the varying agencies. You can go to different agency websites if you know like sort of where your the purpose of your organization, the population you serve, which federal agency that aligns with. Go to those websites and sign up for their newsletters and announcements about and listservs about their funding opportunities. Similarly, state level, at least in Ohio, they have a system set up for this that kind of tracks their grants. It's not quite as robust as the federal government's one, but that is also an opportunity for tracking government grants, and different states have different ways of going about that. So it's kind of playing around on those websites and figuring out how to get on the listservs to get grant announcements. Shaping grants. So this is something that sort of results from like long-term engagement with your with policymakers at the federal, state, and local levels. Those folks are, their jobs are to represent the public with taxpayer dollars. And so they need feedback from organizations like you who are doing the work on the ground in communities. So there are opportunities to share with them about your needs and how there is no funding currently from the government, or if there is not, that addresses those needs. And we have had experiences like this where we've helped shape the government grant program. We've helped, the creation of grant programs through legislative language or other routes. But again, that's all really a result of long-term relationship cultivation with those varying policymakers. And then just again, going after and applying, you can't get denied if you don't apply, and you certainly cannot get funded if you don't apply. So it is worth paying attention to those, when those letters of intent are due, which are often a much lower hanging fruit, sort of like okay, just submit the LOI and see if you got invited back. That takes a lot less work than sometimes the larger onerous grant application. And not all are onerous. Certainly many of the federal level grants are, but not all. And letters of support from members of Congress, from your state legislators, again, that can result from your relationship cultivation and development with those policymakers. So it is worth the time we believe strongly that it is worth the time to get to know your local legislators and members of Congress. One other avenue that has sort of come back into the fold for pursuing government funding is through what are essentially congressional earmarks. If you do have a relationship with your member of Congress, again, this is sort of our area of expertise in the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. Is we work with organizations who are going after these types of funding. And, this is a process that Congress used to earmark funding for in all of their spending bills for years. The process got banned for about a little over a decade, and it has since come back into existence in the last 3 years. So this will be the third year if Congress does them again, which we are anticipating they will, that they will include line items in the federal appropriations bills for nonprofits, colleges and universities, state and local government entities as well. For-profits are not eligible. And we have up here these two acronyms because these are essentially earmarks, but they're called different things. In the U.S. House of Representatives, they're called CPFs, or Community Project Funding process. And then in the U.S. Senate, they are congressionally directed spending projects. And so the eligibility is essentially the same in terms of the nonprofits, qualifications. You're going for a 1-year funding request. sometimes you need matching dollars. It's not required in a lot of the various accounts that you're submitting to. But it can be very helpful to securing that those federal dollars, because you're showing that you have the buy-in from your community, if you already have some matching dollars for a project. What can you get funded? Most cases it's programming. There is some funding available for equipment and construction, depending on the type of facility you're needing the funding for. Funding levels can be anywhere from $50,000 to $1 million, sometimes a little bit more than that, depending on the size of your organization. Key for success in this process, of course, you have to know your member of Congress and who you're submitting to. That's number one, but then demonstrating that you have community support for the project and that your project aligns with that member of Congress's priorities and the funding account that you're submitting through. So generally speaking, the timeline for this is in the next couple of months, we should be seeing submission deadlines both at the federal and state levels. In Ohio, there's a separate kind of process for going after this, but it does exist. And then May through June is when the legislative bodies are considering this process. July through November, House and Senate passed bills on the floor. This is at the federal level. And then usually the whole process gets kind of delayed until December to enact their spending bill with the earmarks included. And I think I am turning it over to my colleague Andrea to kind of wrap up and close this out, and welcome questions again. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. Becky did a really great job covering all of that, but a few things that I wanted to add. Again, my name is Andrea Harless. I lead G2G's office in Columbus. So a lot of work that we do at the State House with clients in Ohio, but also work with Ohio clients on the federal level. And while I was thinking about this slide and thinking about the work all of you do with nonprofits, a couple of years ago, I learned something that really blew my mind. And as like nonprofit leaders, you probably are aware of this, but I was not. In the state of Ohio, there is about 75,000 registered nonprofits. Now these go from like the little teeny tiny nonprofits probably being run by one person all the way up to the big ones. But that is a lot of nonprofits. And of course, we are a bigger state, but that is still a lot of people out there doing a lot of good work. So when I'm thinking about, the earmarks or the, community project funds, the congressionally directed spending, when you're going up against what could be a lot of different nonprofits, being able to stand out is so important. Because I'm based in Franklin County, I often think of Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, who is getting hundreds of requests for earmarks. And they're not all from nonprofits, of course, but she can only submit maybe 10 to 15, depending on what the rules end up being. So I know Becky talked about this, so I won't keep going on, but having that alignment with your members and really just showing the value of what you're doing is so important, and making sure that that is something that she is interested in and is helping her community and aligned with her values. So I love that piece, and I just think that's so important to consider if you are considering doing earmark. So I just have here to close out some tips for pursuing all grants, not just the Shauna M. Sorrells grant, not just earmarks, for all grants. First and foremost, we all know your funding needs. Know what you need, how you're going to spend it. If you can spend it all, especially with government funding, really want to make sure you can spend down all the funding and the timing that is given to you. Being able to personalize and align that application with the grant resource is super important, as we've talked about. And doing your research, a lot of time with government grants, you can go, if it is a grant that reoccurs, you can go back and look at things they funded previously. I like to do that just to see what they funded, and if there's any certain alignment there, if there's a theme behind it, that is really nice. But doing that research to figure out what might be important is smart. Answer all questions that are asked precisely and concisely. We hear over and over again from people that score grants that the best way to get yourself thrown out of a grant application is just to not follow the rules. If there's a 500 word limit, 500 words, not 501, 500. Keep everything to follow those rules. make sure you're answering, if they're asking multiple questions, you're answering all of those questions. You're doing it in as a concise way as possible, making sure somebody can read that and understand what you're saying. Meeting deadlines. This is something I wanted to just talk a little in depth about, because obviously if you do not turn something in by the deadline, you're not going to be considered. If you are applying for a government grant, especially, oftentimes you're having to turn them in on these e-portals. And we have oftentimes seen people run into issues where it's the day the grant is due, it's due at 5 p.m. They just finish it up. We know it takes a lot of time. It's going through many iterations. Lots of people are reading it and they're like, oh, perfect. It's 4 o'clock. We have 1 hour to get this grant in. So we see two things that will happen. One, everyone's trying to put it in at 4 p.m. and the site crashes. That happens. Or two, people don't realize how much it takes to set up these portal accounts. We work closely with the Department of Defense, and they have quite a process to be set up into an online portal in order to submit your grant. So if you are going to apply for a grant where you are submitting through a portal, like an online portal of any sort, my suggestion would be to get your portal account set up, make sure you have all those ducks in a row well before you would want to submit. So if you are turning it in at the 11th hour, you don't have the hurdle of, oh, my portal needs 24 hours for approval, or, oh, I need them to, match my nonprofit number with the IRS before I can do this. Making sure nothing crazy like that happens, because that would be so devastating to spend so much time on a grant application and just not be able to turn it in. So if you're ever submitting through an online portal, do all of that in advance, well in advance. Developing lists of targets to pursue. I know we talked about that, of course, making sure you're aligned with what they're doing, but also that you're talking to the right people and they know what you're doing and they see that value. Make sure you meet all criteria. Sometimes there is a requirement that a nonprofit is partnered with city government or something like that. Just all those little pieces of criteria are really important to read through and understand. Back to being succinct, what you do, why you're valuable, how you're going to use the funding. Using statistics or showing your value through numbers is always really important. I think a narrative is important as well, but the numbers really do show why that value is there and why they should invest into you. Building relationships and funding sources and nourishing them over time. I say this time and time again, but it's easier to ask someone for money if they know you. It's just like being a regular person. I would ask my mom for some money before I'd ask some random person on the street. It's not any different when you're looking at pursuing grants, whether it's, federal grants, whether it's earmarks, whether it's something at the state level. The better someone knows you, they can trust you, they know who you are and what you do, and that you're a good resource, the better, the more likely you are to get funding. Organizing tours and media events, especially for nonprofits, there is nothing like being there. There is nothing like getting them in the door, having them meet you in person, the people you serve in person, seeing your building, seeing what you do, and being able to see it and hear it and touch it and all of those things. That is so important. So getting people out to your location, if that is possible, if you're able to do that, is very important. Also engaging with the community that you serve, your partners, your board. We hear often that it is so great to hear from a CEO about the work they're doing and the value that it has, but it's bigger to hear it from a board member. And it's even bigger to hear it from a person that you're serving, because that just is an added value to it, to show that this is bigger than just the CEO, who it is their job to advance the organization forward. And then, of course, following up and staying in touch is important at all times, not just during a grant process, not just during an earmark request or anything like that. Just that continued just drumbeat of talking to them, that polite persistence of continuing to make sure they know what you're doing and how you're succeeding is so important. And last but not least, and the most important thing, is never give up. If you fail once, we can try again. Never ever give up, no matter how hard it seems. In the end, it can be worth it. So I think I'm going to pass back to Greg to do some Q&A here. Thank you for your time.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Andrea. And we'll keep this slide up as we do the Q&A, because this is just a wonderful quote from Shauna, that words are just a start, action is what is needed. And so we'll keep that up just to kind of resonate, and wanted to field some questions. And the first one, Wendy, want to kick this over to your way. And does your organization get other grant funding? And if so, how do you handle the bandwidth for writing the applications?
Yes, we do get other grant funding. I had a lot of private foundation money in the beginning when we were primarily doing advocacy and community organizing work, but we've been able to kind of through that grow kind of our focus on reentry, and then thereby direct services that we've opportunities and partnerships that have risen where the gaps are that we've been naming, and and giving us the opportunity to step into that. And so therefore I have gone after some government money, and then the bandwidth for writing, I mean, I have the privilege, I suppose, of I am full-time and I have some staff now, so it gives me a lot of my own time to devote to writing that. But I've just recently hired a consultant to help us be able to grow our capacity to take on grants, but and to write more grants, because we're sort of at that threshold that I think we're able to sort of tip into some more. But I don't know. I also have like good folks around me, like on my team, that are able to, proofread and tighten things up for me. Because sometimes I'm very like just swirly thoughts, and so having somebody, especially if that's not all you do is write grants, having somebody else that has some experience and that understands the grant writing process well, to give really good feedback and to make sure, I mean, at least for me, I never want to submit anything that hasn't been read by someone else, and then there'll probably also be like one typo somewhere, much to my shame. But I think that involving someone on your board, someone on your staff, to support you until you're at a stage that you could pay for additional support if that's the direction that you go. I've also had people who are professional grant writers volunteer to help me at different times in my stages, and that's been super beneficial. So, being willing to go out there and talk to people and ask for help, sometimes that can feel harder for some people, but, when you're running an organization and you're really committed to the mission, you're willing to go out there and ask if you know people that have these skills.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. This one, and I will say to the entire audience, if you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A, and if we've got time, we will get to them. But for now, we'll continue with the ones that we have so far. So this one's for the G2G team. You mentioned that there's a committee. Can you say more about the review process and what the committee is looking for in an application? So I don't know if Becky or Andrea or Liz, you want to take that one?
Sorry. Sure. I mean, so our committee that looks at the grant applications for the Shauna M. Sorrells grants includes it can vary year to year, but includes certainly Liz and Isaiah that Liz mentioned at the top of the hour. And then folks from the G2G team, and sometimes folks from Shauna's network. So, this is our, sort of process, is that we go through all the grant applications, again, looking at the varying narratives, how the individual organizations plan to use the funds if they are awarded them, how they are addressing how the organization is addressing, the purpose of the grant, and kind of go through a scoring process based on all those factors, and narrow down in that way. So Andrea, you came on I don't know if you want to add to that about how our committee operates.
Yeah, it was that, I mean, that's a great overview of how our committee operates. But one thing that Wendy noted that I think is really important, because it's something that we looked at really closely, especially with a grant like Shauna's grant. What is so important to us is that the money that's being used is being done in good work in Shauna's name. So something that we always like is when we see people talk about Shauna or specifically bring her up in the grant and recognize that, this funding is in the name of a wonderful woman, and they will be using that funding to advance work that she would have loved as well. So that's a very personal to this grant, but I know that every time that we see someone mention her name or specifically call out, her life and her legacy, that's something that always speaks volumes to us, that they took the time to. And I think Becky said, it's not just like a copy and paste from any other grant. They took the time to actually think about it and think of Shauna. And I know that means a lot to all of us.
Okay, great, thanks. This one is also for the G2G team, and maybe Becky, because you were talking about the government grants. What's the difference between the Shauna M. Sorrells program and the government grants that you mentioned? And I think they're referring more to the congressionally directed spending and the earmark type stuff. So can you kind of distinguish the two?
Yeah, so the Shauna M. Sorrells is a private grant program that is funded by Liz Powell and her family to honor the legacy of Shauna. So this is completely a privately run grant program. Government grants are, again, taxpayer dollars that are funneled through the varying state and federal agencies. We at G2G, who work with Liz and team, we are that is our profession, is to work alongside many nonprofits and other organizations who are trying to navigate government. And so we see a lot of parallels in the grant process. And that's part of the purpose of this webinar today, is to share some of our expertise on navigating these processes. And there's a lot of overlap, even with our small private grant. So that is sort of the main difference is, and with the government grants, it's a very, to some degree, transparent process where everything you put out, into the ether, if you will, in your application is public, and is going through a public process that is that the federal level agencies or Congress or state government agencies are reviewing and putting those dollars out back into the community to meet the goals of those agencies or those members of Congress, policymakers. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, I think there's another line of questioning there that fits with this. So somebody asked, can small nonprofits really get these federal earmarks that you mentioned? And if so, how can the smaller nonprofits stand out against the bigger nonprofits?
Yeah, we have seen that they can. I think, again, it very much depends on your relation, the federal earmarks that we mentioned, again, have a lot to do with the relationship development with a member of Congress, House or Senate, and, getting to know their staff, getting to understand their priorities as a member of Congress. If you are doing work in the area of, just for example, infant mortality, I'm just making this up, but like if that's the purpose of your organization, is to address, infant mortality rates in your community, and that happens to be that member, your member of Congress's like number one legislative priority, you should definitely go talk to his or her team, about that. And the fact that, you are small, but like, here's your great impact, or, couldn't you partner with other organizations in your field? or other organizations that are serving the region to go after a program together, to go after an earmark together. That is an approach that we have seen to be very successful as well.
Okay, great. So Wendy, this question is for you. There's kind of along the theme that we heard earlier about kind of how you approach grants, but from a small nonprofit CEO who has to wear a lot of hats and do a lot of things, do you have 3 tips of how that person can kind of prioritize? Like, what would be some 3 tips to recommendations for them to kind of expand their horizon and be able to go after grant money like Shauna or other stuff?
Yeah, I think, it's funny. I think what was just said is really spot on. So forgive me if I'm repeating, but I think partnerships are important, especially if you're small. We can't do everything. So building relationships with others that work similarly in your space and developing good relationships and trusting relationships with other organizations that you want to partner with is very helpful, because then you can sort of have a much more robust application and bring additional expertise to your program that you're working on. The relationship building, there's just no way around it. It takes time. And honestly, when I first got started here, I'm not from Columbus originally, and there is just a lot to just showing up. It's harder now because of COVID, but back in the day, going to the meetings, like going in person, talking to people, offering thoughts. I go to a lot of coalition meetings, a lot of things that are in my sphere for me, which is reentry, but kind of really getting to know, who's who and who does what, and not being afraid to talk to your government leaders. It's true, like your city leaders, your county leaders. We have funding from the Board of Commissioners, and it took some time, but our organization is small, but in our little world of reentry, people do know our work, and so I think that that's really important. Having a calendar, knowing when those grants do come, and then also maybe having like things drafted that you can go to. And like was being said, you don't want to just copy paste and not tailor. You need to tailor everything as best as you can when it's ever appropriate, but having things already ready to go, because sometimes, especially with government funding, it'll release and you have like 2 weeks, or you have a month, but maybe you have an event, and that's it can be tricky sometimes, with the timing. So when you're small and you're doing a lot of things, you kind of need to be prepared in advance as best as you can, so when the opportunities arise. And then one final thing I'll say is join the Human Service Chamber. It took me a minute. I knew about them, but they are an incredible resource, and there is a fee, but it's on a scale for the size of your organization. The Human Service Chamber is basically, okay, so I guess this is for Franklin County. I realize there may be other folks on this call, but so I'm in Columbus, so if you're in Columbus or in your area, if there is a chamber or an association for nonprofits, look into that, right? Because their job is to also help to amplify information and resources. And for us, the individual who runs it is just chock full of information and is constantly helping us to be aware, especially of any city or county funds. So again, another place to show up, in your industry. I think there's a lot of people who have nonprofits that I've never heard of, and you don't know where they are. So, relationships is a key part. And those are my thoughts.
Great, thanks, Wendy. And so in the interest of time, I don't see any other questions, but I do want to close out some things here. And Becky, I'm not sure if there's another slide or two, or is this our last slide? Okay, so this has our contact information. So please feel free to reach out to us. But before we do some closeout, Becky and Andrea, and I wanted to, well, not put you on the spot, but bring you back to the camera and ask if there's one thing that people should take away from today, just one. What is that one thing that you would have them part with?
Good one, Greg.
So if you want to think about it.
I think that, I mean, I think what Wendy just said about like not being afraid of your, to go interact with your government leaders. I mean, again, these are people that are elected into their positions with, the regular people that, are just part of this world, and they have a lot of access to resources, and it may not always be direct dollars to your organization, but it's could be, a connection to another organization who is doing, work tangential to yours, and it could spark a great, relationship that enables you to go after some big grant, or or they just know other organizations out there doing something. We've seen this over and over and over again in our decades of work in this field, is that government leaders, because so many people and so many organizations are coming to them with their ideas and their problems and their suggestions, that they have access to a lot of information and can be phenomenal connectors beyond just the world of government grants, which might sound itself overwhelming, or is it really worth it? Are we really ever going to be eligible? Whatever. I think your government leaders are can be phenomenal connectors, and it's very worthwhile to take the time to develop a relationship with them.
Okay, great. Thanks, Becky. Andrea, one thing that you want people to take away from today, and then we're going to give Wendy an opportunity to give hers.
I know Becky and I are a good team, because I was basically going to say the same thing. But when I think about our government leaders, especially, this is kind of our area, so this is where my brain goes to. They don't know everything. They were elected to serve their constituency, and they don't know everything, and they don't know everything that's going on. And you really bring a great value to them by bringing your organization in front of them and telling them who you are, what you do, and the people that you serve. And I could think of so many times I sat across the table from a legislator and with a nonprofit leader who explained what they do, and I could literally see the light bulbs going off in their head of, I never even considered this service was needed, or I never even considered we could do this, or I've never even considered that these people needed help, and I'm so glad you brought this to me. And making those connections, I think those relationships, and we hear this over and over again from people that we work with in nonprofits, that the value of having relationships with legislators is so important, not just for funding, for anything, for having them come to an event, for having them speak to their community, or if they, when they serve kids, coming to talk to them. Having those relationships is so valuable.
Thanks, Andrea. And then Wendy, one thing I saw that you had kind of put in the chat, one thing that you would part to your colleagues that are listening in that they should take away from today.
Yeah, I would just say, if you think that Shauna Sorrells' legacy is aligned with your organization, then you should apply. What did they have, all these pithy quotes like, you lose all of the shots you don't take, or something like that. It's the worst you can do is not win. I mean, and then okay. And all of the times I've written things and not won, it at least gives me the experience of having to articulate my work and my mission. I never really feel, and I've gone after federal grants that are very complicated, but I don't feel like it's a waste of time, because any of those things that you're doing, it's also helping you continually hone and be able to articulate what you are doing. And so even if you don't win, you've let these wonderful people who have all these other resources that they serve in the community as lobbyists, as legislative liaisons, to be aware of your organization. It was not always about the funding, it's also about the relationship building, and this is one of those times for relationship building. So I would sort of look at it all of those ways. So if you think you might want to apply, you should just do it. The application is not hard. and you know, put yourself in the ring. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Wendy. And to Deandra, we saw your comment that said that this was chock full of information and great strategies. She's in Columbus, never heard of the Human Chamber, so she thanked us for that. So thanks, everybody. And I just wanted to, as we close out today, thanks everybody for joining us. And I'll just say this, you know, we've seen that the overarching theme for Shauna M. Sorrells' program is to honor her legacy through giving and projects that are making a difference within communities that are most in need. We are very proud of how this program is bringing together a community, a network, if you will, of nonprofits of all sizes, and especially smaller nonprofits with big missions and limited resources. This program is developing and evolving a network that can benefit from the Shauna M. Sorrells programming and insights. So we're providing grant funding to nonprofits is a key element of the program. And central to the program is that recipients are both dedicated to meaningful services and programming that is geared in some way to women and children, especially women of color. We're also very proud that this program is a catalyst for giving and support to nonprofits. There are the direct prize awards, obviously the cash prize awards, but our annual Opening Doors to Giving event, which was the brainchild of Liz Powell and Isaiah Dadsey, is bigger than just giving out money. We announced the semi-finalists and the finalists and ultimately the grand prize winner at the Opening Doors to Giving event. But that event is also about supporting a wide range of nonprofits, all with great causes and missions. We've received over hundreds of applications for these great causes. You can see that we take a lot of pride in how we select those. And we hope that these tips will help you to make it through not only this application, but other applications to get your project recognized and help it to stand out from the crowd. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for all that you do in your community, for your community, local, state, federal, all of that. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us and check back on our website because we'll be posting the next round of Shauna M. Sorrells Awards. And we alluded to that timeline starting in August, September, and then ultimately through October and November. So if you have any questions, let us know. And thank you again for all that you do. And we'll talk to you later.